diverse. So this is a topic that we feel is very important. We need to start having these conversations, and Reyma and Central Iowa Center for Independent Living is very involved with our chamber, and so we thought that we would ask her to do this. So we're thrilled for all of you to be on the call. I know many are looking forward to it. I believe we are recording it, correct? Once we get started. So we will get that posted out there for those that were not able to be on the actual call. This is one of many events that the chamber has. Our Feed Your Mind, it's typically an in-person lunch and learn event. We've obviously pivoted with COVID-19, and we've been doing these online. So for the immediate future anyway, but with that said, MediaCom Business, also a member of our chamber, does sponsor these. So we do want to give them a few minutes just to thank them and let them say a few words.
Thank you, Trish. This is Holly with MediaCom Business. In regards to what Trish had said earlier, I'm going to go ahead and continue to keep my camera off. And just to go on and continue to say that Trish has been absolutely wonderful with the events of COVID and how she's been able to pivot and get everything moving and still have events virtually. And so we can all still be a part of that community togetherness. And just so we're all, as we all begin to transition back into, I want to do a quote unquote, our new normal. And as businesses start to open, we're still practicing social distancing. Lots of people are still having issues with their internet or trying to figure out where to go for any internet or phone lines. Just know that I did put my email address also in the group chat, so you can get a hold of me any given time. And I'll be more than happy to talk you through it. It does include, if you're working from home, I am able to help work with you on that as well and get you some service, some reliable service, so you continue to work from home if you need to. And so I am going to keep this brief because this is a pretty big subject right now in our society, and I would love to hear what Reyma's got to say. And so I'm going to pass it on from here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to MediaCom and to Fuse DSM for allowing us this opportunity to come together today and talk about something that has really become the forefront of social consciousness in a very short period of time. And I just wanted to also thank everybody that's joining us today as a participant. I know that this is a subject matter that is necessary, but isn't necessarily a comfortable area of conversation for many people. And so my real goal as far as this presentation is concerned is to kind of create a safe space for us to have this conversation, but also to work through the discomfort that many of us are also feeling as far as implicit bias and any conversation concerning race is concerned. So without further ado, let me just get my screen working on my end. So we're talking implicit bias today. Got implicit bias? If you have a pulse, you have implicit bias. So that implicit bias is something that all of us experience in some way, shape, or form. Today, we are going to be talking about implicit bias specific to the vantage point of race. So although implicit bias can be seen in our lives in a variety of capacities, today, for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to be focused on implicit bias as it pertains to race in the United States. So we're going to talk about what implicit bias is, because it has become a buzzword, and it's one of those words that gets used so much that people don't necessarily stop to ask themselves, do I actually know what this word means? So we're going to talk about what is it. We're also going to talk about what it isn't, because implicit bias is a word that is used interchangeably with other words that kind of orbit conversations pertaining to race and equity. And so I want to make sure that we're really clear about what it isn't as well. Then we're also going to talk about how people can sometimes hide during conversations about race. Again, it's a given. This is an uncomfortable topic for many people. And so if you can think back to some of the diversity and inclusion trainings that you may have participated in the past, there's a lot of hiding that can happen when this topic is on the table. And so we're going to talk about that because it can create impediments to progress as far as implicit bias and determining how it impacts our places of work and society on a whole are concerned. And then we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. What is racism? What isn't racism? And then finally, we're going to determine if taking a stand is good for business. And so we've seen a lot of examples in the media lately of how implicit bias, race, equity, privilege, fragility are playing out in places of business and are impacting people even outside of their places of work when they engage in behaviors that demonstrate racism or implicit bias. So that's a whole lot to cover in a very short period of time. To reiterate, this is a safe space, not necessarily a comfortable space. And so, but I want to give everybody a heads up. Discomfort isn't necessarily a sign that what I'm saying is not correct. With regards to this particular topic of conversation, discomfort more often than not is a sign that you are being pointed in the right direction. And so let's just breathe together and move our way through this very important conversation. So throughout the presentation, I would invite and encourage you to put your questions into the chat. We're gonna stop at 12:15. That's about a half an hour from now, to allow for a good 30 minutes of questions. There are typically loads of questions when this is the topic of conversation. I want to make sure that as many voices are heard as possible. And so if you want those questions to remain confidential, just post them to me privately in the chat. And then if you're comfortable with everybody seeing your question, go ahead and post it so that everybody can see it. Who am I? My name's Reyma McCoy McDeid. I'm the Executive Director of Central Iowa Center for Independent Living. And according to the registration sheet, we've got a boatload of Fuse DSM members that are joining us this afternoon. So many of you are probably familiar with some of the other faces at CISL, including Laura Gibson and Brana Crace, who do a wonderful job of supporting our disabled clients to attain and maintain employment in the central Iowa area. And I am kind of the lady behind the curtain. And so I'm not as involved in employment. I do a lot more with regards to trainings like this, for instance, but I also do a lot of the advocacy that we have become known for. And we do advocacy for disabled people at the municipal, state, and national level. Actually, we received the Organization of the Year award from the City of Des Moines in 2018 as a result of both of our employment and our advocacy efforts. I'm also the co-chair of the National Council on Independent Living's Anti-Racism and Equity Task Force. I speak all over the country on the topic of disability, diversity, intersectionality, and racism. And so this is a passion of mine. I am fully committed to doing whatever it takes to ensure that all spaces that we inhabit, both at work and in our lives, are inclusive and accessible in every capacity to all of us. With regard to that, I am the 2019 AT&T Humanity of Connection Award honoree, and that I received that award because of my work with regards to inclusion. And then finally, I'm also the first openly autistic individual to run for state legislature in US history. So it sounds somewhat lofty, but really I'm just a lady, a mom from Iowa that ran for office 1 year and lost miserably. But anyhow. Let's get started. So, diving into implicit bias. I'm going to ask a bunch of rhetorical questions throughout this presentation, beginning with this one. Which one of these individuals looks like a felon to you? So, if you don't know, it's Martha Stewart. She's the felon. Snoop Dogg has never been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor or anything like that. So that's that is a great picture, because I think that it really speaks to a lot of layers of implicit bias, and because we're talking about race, obviously race is a mitigating factor in how somebody might perceive these two individuals with regards to which one has a criminal record. Well, actually, it's the older white woman that has the criminal record, not the younger rapper guy. So before we really start tackling the concept of implicit bias, let's make sure that we have a shared understanding of what the word means. And so implicit bias can be defined as attitudes and or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, and our decisions in an unconscious manner. Emphasis on the word unconscious. When we are operating from our implicit biases, we're not doing it consciously. Our old brain primarily is taking over. It's supplying the rest of our brain and our bodies with information that's based on instinct primarily. And so that was helpful 10,000 years ago when we were running away from wildebeests. It's 2020 now, and so our ability to engage with our implicit biases can kind of backfire in the 21st century. So this is not implicit bias. This is a very explicit example of racism. And so this is not implicit bias. Please know that both implicit bias and explicit bias play into what racism is. Oftentimes when we talk about racism, our minds, our old brains immediately go towards thinking about very explicit presentations of racism, like the Ku Klux Klan burning a cross at night. Very explicit, very obviously racism. But racism can also be a lot more discreet than what this picture shows. And implicit bias definitely plays into the more covert expressions of racism. So here are some examples of implicit bias. So you are an HR professional and you are reviewing resumes with regards to an open position at your place of employment. Passing on a resume that has a name like Shaminka Jenkins at the top is an example of implicit bias. Your old brain sees the name Shaminka Jenkins and immediately jumps to conclusions, and you make a decision based on that. That is implicit bias. Quietly rushing to hide your purse in your desk when a Black man in a delivery uniform walks past you, even if his hands are full of packages, and it would be logistically improbable that he would steal your purse. Again, that's your old brain. That's implicit bias coming in and making decisions and compelling you to take an action, not necessarily based on logic, but based on instinct. Experiencing anxiety when a Black coworker is not smiling. Determining that hair as it naturally grows out of a person's head is unprofessional. That is definitely a definition of implicit bias, and we're seeing that at play across the country. State legislation protecting individuals who have hair like mine or hair that's more coily than mine, to allow us to go to work with our hair looking the way that it does as it naturally grows out of our heads. Historically, it's been a huge issue at places of employment, and discrimination against individuals who are Black who have natural hair. Simplifying your language when speaking with Black people. There's lots of empirical evidence that shows that it is a trend for white people to simplify language and when interacting with Black people. And it's an implicit bias. It just happens automatically. And there's no malicious intent associated with it typically. But it is something that happens. Assuming that the white male, or in the absence of a male, female is a manager. I can't tell you how many times we at CISL are in the office and someone comes in who's not familiar with any of us and assumes that either Brana or Laura are the executive director here, and are surprised when they find that it's actually me that's the executive director. This is an example of implicit bias. Again, no malicious intent, but the impact is that there's covert seeds of racism that are happening. So the default setting for American is white people. The proof of this is when we say the term American, 95% of us, our brains immediately think of people who are white, middle class, heterosexual, wholesome, holding an American flag, two-parent household, 2 children, a dog, that kind of thing. And then with regards to, excuse me, the word itself, how does the word American make you feel? What are some of the thoughts that come to your mind when you think American? 4th of July, barbecues, patriotism, Declaration of Independence, that kind of thing. Let's add a very simple word as a prefix to American. White American. How do those words together make you feel? Again, this is one of many rhetorical questions that I'm going to ask throughout our presentation today. Are you feeling any of the following right now in response to the term white and American being put together? Anxiety, defensiveness, irritation, frustration, feeling put on the spot, feeling guilty. What's coming up for you when you see the term white American? More than likely, that is what we know of as white fragility. If you're feeling anxiety or just like, I'm not feeling very good right now, I feel like I might actually be kind of attacked right now, that's white fragility. And white fragility is defined as discomfort and defensiveness when whiteness is pointed out, especially when whiteness is pointed out in the context of conversation regarding racial inequality, injustice, systems of oppression, implicit bias, all of these things. Privilege. But white fragility, my argument is white fragility is a very logical response to being called out for something that you aren't fully aware that you're doing. So I know that so much has happened for all of us as Central Iowans, as Americans, in less than 4 weeks. My guess is that 4 weeks ago, the things that were occupying your mind are a lot different than what they are now. Or at least there are things that have been brought to the forefront of your consciousness that have been added to the things that you were already thinking about. COVID-19. Oh, and now I also have to think about civil unrest, my goodness. Oh, and I'm hearing a lot of things about how my whiteness is potentially harmful to other people. That makes me feel very defensive because I'm not intentionally doing anything to harm people. This is a very logical response. So I argue that white fragility isn't necessarily a negative thing. It's definitely something to sit with, to sit and think about, think through. Because what we do in reaction to experiencing white fragility, We could end up engaging in behaviors that present us with an opportunity to be held accountable. But white fragility in and of itself, the feeling of guilt or anxiety in response to these kinds of conversations isn't inherently a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. Because implicit bias is unconscious. And it would be very unfair for any of us to be held accountable for things that are happening in our unconsciousness. To reiterate, there's nothing necessarily wrong with you. But when you know better, you have the choice to do better. And so hopefully conversations like these, and this is not a one and done type of thing. This is just the very beginning. But with conversations like these, you'll become more aware, and you will know better, and you will feel empowered to do better. Let's pause, take a breath, inhale, exhale. And let's just get into it. Got white privilege. So here we have Miss Paris Hilton, picture of her from several years ago, and she's wearing a shirt that says, "Stop being poor." So typically when we talk about privilege, white privilege, we think wealth. And so if we are a white person that's not wealthy, we think, I don't have privilege. I don't have white privilege. That's not me. That's not necessarily true. What is white privilege, really? It's defined as inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society that is characterized by racial inequality and injustice, and other layers of inequality as well: gender, disability, sexual orientation, religious affiliation. But again, our focus today is on racial inequality. And so in the context of racial inequality, white privilege is all about having advantages that someone like myself, a Black woman, does not have simply because of the color of one's skin. And so what is this, what does this white privilege look like? White privilege is, again, one of those terms that's getting thrown around a lot right now. People are using it, might not necessarily know what the definition is, but many people are definitely sure that they don't have it. Let's talk about what it looks like in daily life, because if you are listening right now, if you are white, no matter what economic sphere you are living in, this is going to be relevant to you. This is going to be your experience. So if you are white, you probably don't get followed in the purse section at Von Maur. That's happened to me. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm extremely passionate about purses. So I invest a fair amount of my salary into things like purses. And the last time I was at Von Maur, which admittedly was a very long time ago because this experience was not pleasant for me, I was followed. And it was very obvious that the clerk assumed that I was going to be somebody that needed to have eyes on to keep, in order to ensure that I wasn't going to engage in criminal activity. Very deeply offensive. This is not something that happens to white people. There's also the presumption of competence and authority when you're a white person. So no matter what position you're in, particularly if you are a white person and you are amongst colleagues who are people who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. Typically, if a person walks into a space where you and your colleagues are, they're going to look at you as the authority. They're probably going to assume that you're the manager or in some kind of decision-making position in comparison to your colleagues who are people of color. Getting taken seriously when you demand to speak to the manager. When you are a white person and you demand to speak to the manager, results happen more often than not. There was an incident in the South a few years ago where a Black American woman experienced less than par customer service at a Waffle House and demanded to speak to a manager. And the individual at the cash register, instead of contacting the manager, contacted the police. And the woman that demanded to speak to the manager was arrested, unfortunately, very violently arrested. That's not something that happens to white people when they demand to speak to the manager. So this is an example of privilege. Getting chosen for a promotion over your Black colleague who might happen to have more education and experience than you do is also an example of white privilege. Calling the police and being extremely confident that they are going to protect you or at the very least not shoot you. That is also white privilege. So as I'm talking about white privilege, I'm hoping that you're connecting the dots and seeing, my goodness, implicit bias and white privilege go hand in hand. Because of my implicit biases, I am playing into the mechanism that is white privilege. This is a great example. A white male with a criminal record is 5% more likely to get a job over a man of color with a clean record. This is white privilege dovetailed with implicit bias together. They go hand in hand. Implicit bias and white privilege in the wrong hands can become a weapon. Now what we have here is a picture of Amy Cooper who a few weeks ago called NYPD on a Black American gentleman in Central Park. And we all know that the gentleman was fine, nothing happened to him. But we also know, with very recent examples, times when white people have called the police on Black people, and unfortunately it has resulted in Black people getting harmed or dying. So I know that there are some of you who are thinking, this is, she's just speaking in generalizations. I could think of plenty of exceptions to what Reyma's talking about right now. Yes, you can. Of course you can. There are exceptions to almost every rule. We are talking about systems right now, okay? We are talking about rules. We're not talking about exceptions. And actually, it's not helpful to talk about exceptions. We need to talk about the infrastructure, the system that perpetuates implicit bias, that perpetuates racism and privilege and oppression. And actually focusing on exceptions is a really fantastic way of hiding from conversations like this. And so I invite everybody that's listening right now, if you're experiencing a little bit of fragility and that fragility is manifesting in your mind with regards to thoughts about, well, I could think about an exception to this, I can think about an exception to that. Yes, you can. I'm asking you, I'm challenging you to go beyond that and think systemically, not just individually. So systems of oppression, not an early 2000s new metal band. This is the framework that we live in, and it informs implicit bias. It plays into implicit bias. All of these things, they're like wheels inside of wheels operating this clock. So think, what do you see in your mind's eye when I say man? Here's a man. Typically in our society, the default setting for a man is a white man. And we know this because if we're not referring to a white man, we'll say a Latinx man, an Asian American man, a Black man. What do you see in your mind's eye when I say a Black man? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at Google Images when we Google Black man. What you see primarily is in reference to Black men who've been killed very recently. either by police or by people who have some kind of adjacency to law enforcement. That's kind of a heartbreaking example of implicit bias in action. Your white privilege and implicit biases are conditioning inherent to the system that we live in. And it's a system that is designed to benefit you and subjugate me. That's a very bold statement to say, but if you think about the country as it was coming together, if you looked like me, or if you were unambiguously Black, you were enslaved more than likely. The entire reason why you were in this country was to benefit white people and be subjugated to white people. Yes, slavery ended generations ago, but that infrastructure has never been addressed yet. And so it still mitigates how I operate in this society with you and how you operate in this society with me. And systems are like computer programs. There's the matrix. If you're an old millennial like myself, then you probably were in college when the matrix came out and blew your mind like it blew mine. We're living in a matrix. We're living in this giant computer program, basically, designed to run with specific rules. And it malfunctions if it's presented with information that veers from its original programming. It's just the way it was designed. And so white fragility is a very human way of saying does not compute, does not make sense. Fortunately, computer programs and computers themselves have evolved, and so can you, and so can society itself. Let's think about what we've got going on right now. So, Black Lives Matter statements of solidarity, authored by corporations, organizations, etc., from 2013 through about a month ago. We've got an image of a tumbleweed here. I can't think of any major corporation or organization that put out a statement of solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter statements of solidarity that have been authored by corporations and organizations since May 26. Let's have a look. Let's do a quick Google search. Well, this might not load, but I will have this PowerPoint handy for everybody. Oh, here we are. What you'll see, look at these dates. Solidarity statement, June 8th, June 5th, June 10th.
They're not popping up for us.
Oh, okay.
On the screen share.
Okay. I apologize, everybody. But what I've done is I Googled Black Lives Matter statements of solidarity. And what you'll see on the first few pages are corporations, organizations, and initiatives that have pumped out statements of solidarity basically since May 26th. And so, and that's great. This is not me complaining about that whatsoever. It's absolutely wonderful to see the solidarity that's happening right now in such a short period of time. But this is a lot for us to take in as a society. And we all, most of us want to do the right thing right now, including you. And we want to follow through with the statements of solidarity that we or our organizations or our employers have put out, obviously. Few people know where to start, though, and even fewer people want to admit it. Nobody wants to be the first one to say, you know what, I'm a good person, but I don't know how to work with people who are different from me. And I know that I need to do better, but I don't know how to begin. I know the answer though, and it's very simple, but it's not easy. Are you ready for it? Because here it is. It starts with you. A lot of times, diversity and inclusion training is all about the external. Let's read these books. Let's put together a think tank, a task force, a work group. Let's talk about our policies, our procedures, our guidelines. Let's talk about, let's just talk. Let's just talk around this subject. But at the end of the day, unless we're actually doing inner work, all that talk is just going to fall by the wayside, unfortunately. It's going to get lost in the shuffle. That outside work has to happen in tandem with inside work. And so poor Paris Hilton, don't tell her that I'm picking on her throughout my presentation, but there she is, having a look at herself. We haven't talked about what racism is yet. Super important. What is it? So according to Merriam-Webster, racism is defined as a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities. Racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Now, if you unpack this definition of racism, it kind of makes it look like anybody could be a racist, you know. It doesn't talk at all about the importance of power, the role that power plays in creating racist situations. Anybody can discriminate, anybody can be prejudiced. But if you can do both of those things and you have the power that society affords you because of the privilege that you have for having white skin, you can participate in racism. So that was the definition of racism until very recently. And I'm not going to click on this link because I know that those of you who are participating are not able to see the link. So let me do a pantomime of what this link leads to. This link leads to a 22-year-old Drake University graduate, a young Black woman who followed up with Merriam-Webster about their definition of racism and informed them that because the definition does not reference the role of power in creating racist situations, their definition is not correct. They agreed with her. They are in the process of updating their definition of racism right as we speak, and hopefully by the end of the summer, Merriam-Webster will have an updated and accurate definition for what racism is. So we can thank a Black woman from Iowa for that. So racism makes people feel bad. You know, I'm here to tell you, if you think you feel bad learning about what racism is, try experiencing it 1,000 times worse. I don't say that to make anybody feel bad. The same power that fuels racism can be used to dismantle it. If you are white, this is your golden opportunity to be a hero, to be a heroine. Use your power, use your privilege, and use it to dismantle the system that oppresses people like me. The choice is yours until it isn't. So this link here is a pretty comprehensive list of everybody that's been fired in the past month as a result of engaging in racist behavior that's been caught on film or because of racist tweets that individuals have put out. And so on this list of folks is included the individual that was the CEO of CrossFit, for instance. And so it's a very long list of folks. You know, racism very quickly has become bad for business, bad for business. And implicit bias has also become a very major liability. And so now is really the time to update your strategic plans accordingly and get really clear about, okay, this is the statement of solidarity that we put out. what are our action steps going to be to ensure that we follow through with this? What is that going to look like? Who do we need to pull into our conversation to make this happen? I want to thank everybody for your time. And as this cartoon indicates, we are just getting started. This presentation is just scratching the surface. This is your invitation into the rabbit hole, so to speak. If you are one of the wonderful people that's just now recognizing racism in the US, welcome. We're just getting started, and seek out support with regards to determining what can be done about it. For more information or to schedule an initial consultation, feel free to email me at reyma@sisl.org. Also like us on Facebook at Sisl Iowa to keep up with what we're doing, not only with regards to implicit bias, but also advocacy efforts and all the other wonderful things that we do at Sisl. I would like to open it up to questions now. So I'm gonna open up the chat box and all right. Oh, we got lots of folks that are lots of people are super excited about the captioning, Gretchen. Thank you. Got like 20 comments about that, so very good. And yes, we are recording. So if you joined us after we noted, we have recorded this session. It will be publicly available to folks if you just give us a few hours to get it up and going. So here we go. We've got a question from Sarah. For institutions that want to begin this work of addressing implicit bias, what is the process steps that I recommend? Many will host a training with staff or board, but that's it. So let me talk a little bit about how we do it here at Sisl. Fortunately, with the opportunity to engage in implicit bias trainings or anti-racism trainings, there are a wealth of people in the community that are available to facilitate these types of trainings, and each training looks different. So I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like at Sisl. So what we will do, and it's because we know that the half-day one and done training is just not, ultimately the return on investment is not there. You get somebody, they come in, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. They throw a bunch of terminology at folks, and then it's 5 o'clock and everybody leaves and people are just like totally befuddled, don't really know what happened. But the training definitely happened, so we can cross that off of our list of things to do and move on. That does not get to the heart of implicit bias. It doesn't get to the heart of what we have been talking about. So this is what we do at Sisl. We do offer the half day, but more often than not, what people sign up for is the half day initial introductory training for a department or an organization, a cohort of 30 or less people. And then after that initial half day, I will meet one-on-one with everybody, each and every person for about an hour to have a very individualized conversation with that person with regards to implicit bias, meeting them where they specifically are at and answering the specific questions they have about how they can overcome implicit bias, how they can use their privilege to do the proactive things that need to be done. But that one-on-one time is really crucial to ensuring that this kind of training resonates with people, makes sense to people with regards to where their personal vantage point is. after those one-on-ones happen, we'll all come together as a group for an additional half-day training. And it's meant to kind of wrap things up, but it also is meant to be a spearhead for next steps. So after that half day, everybody's left with an understanding of what their next steps are, both specific to them as individuals, but also specific to the department or the organization or the corporation or the entity itself. And then about 3 months down the road, after all of that has happened, we'll do a final 2-hour check-in to allow for people to identify where they're at, where the organization is at, and determine if additional service or support around implicit bias is needed. So that's what it looks like at CISL. And it can look a variety of different ways. I know that there are some trainers that do a lot of work groups with folks. We at CISL are focused on the individual. And so nobody gets to hide in a work group with regards to this topic of conversation, with regards to what we do here at CISL. And our next question. We have someone from who's based out of state, who's not a member, but with regards to their solidarity statement, this employee emailed her employer and offered not only resources to distribute, but invited them to this webinar. Thank you, Lisa, from Omaha. And it was primarily ignored. So what are some other steps that I can take to keep my employers accountable for walking the talk of their statement? Oh my goodness, that's a good question. Oh, and I apologize. Lisa's not in Omaha, but her company is. Okay, that's a fantastic question. If there's a variety of directions that a person can take this. And so I would actually love to see this statement of solidarity, because if it doesn't have action steps and it's more of a kind of we stand united with X, Y, and Z, then that to me is an indication that that's where it ends for them. They made this statement and they're moving forward. And so I would just, if the work climate allows for a direct question, I would just ask, I would just say, hey, I really appreciated this statement. It really resonated with me. And this statement compels me as an individual to want to take action. What can I do as a representative of this company to support this company to keep this statement alive? This is a statement that needs to not just be filed away somewhere. This is good stuff. What can I do to be a support? So kind of managing up, so to speak. That kind of approach typically with people in decision-making roles, it indicates to them that, oh, this is a person that wants to kind of share the load, so to speak. And then also in the back of their mind, they're thinking, oh, we wrote this statement, we're kind of being held accountable to follow through with it. Maybe we need to do something about that. And so the very initial step, I would say, is just following up with them and telling them, great statement, I love it, I want to make this happen for our place of employment. What can I do to be of assistance? What can I do to support this company to make this happen? So, and I think that might be all of our questions. So does anybody have
a question?
Yes.
My question is, how can you divorce the like Black Lives Matters and the whole issue with dealing with race politically? Do you know, because a lot of people will take a stance like, well, you're just spouting political issues, and and I don't see it as a political issue. It's a human rights issue. It
Sure.
doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican,
Sure.
but you'll have people that will, you know, blindly on one side
Yeah.
not care. Because I've had many arguments in my family dealing with this issue, and they're like, well, you're just being a Democrat. I'm like, that has nothing to do with it. This is
Right.
people are dying and getting hurt, and you don't that's how, like, so as a how do you do that?
Yeah.
I'll,
Yeah.
I'll
Thank you, Bill. That's an excellent question. So just last week, and I don't know if you're in Iowa, I'm going to assume that you're in Iowa, but just last week, before the Iowa State Legislature wrapped up, the state legislators came together from both sides of the aisle and passed legislation with regards to well, what we're all talking about right now, police violence. And so that was a very bipartisan legislation, and our governor, who's a Republican, is if she hasn't, I believe she signed that into law. And so that's a great example of the fact that people, no matter what their political affiliation is, are waking up to the crisis that we're in as far as racism is concerned in our country. And so I don't know if Bill, if that would resonate with the people in your life. I don't know if they follow state politics closely, but that I do follow state politics closely, and I was very pleasantly surprised at how our legislators across the state, across aisles, really came together without a lot of to do about it, and just got down to business and got this legislation passed. And additionally, even yesterday, there, at the White House level, conversation was entertained with regards to police violence. Now, the components of that conversation, they are what they are, but the fact that it was entertained is to me a sign that this is something that all of us are thinking about. And we're hundreds of millions of people in this country, so we're not all coming to the same conclusions at the same time. We've got a continuum of understanding, and so recognizing that is key, but also recognizing that at this time it's unprecedented that almost the entire continuum of people, no matter what their political party is, no matter what their race is, et cetera, has some smattering of understanding that we've got racial issues in this country. And we might not necessarily be in agreement as far as what the solutions are, but for the first time in US history, we all recognize that race is something that we can't hide from anymore. Anybody else have we have a question that was just sent to me. Are there age-appropriate resources that you might suggest for parents, particularly white parents who foster or adopt children of other cultures and races? I have 2 young sons and 1 daughter. Yes. And this is a resource that was written by Dr. Jennifer Harvey, who is a Des Moines resident, Raising White Kids. This is a book for parents to read. It's not a children's book, but I would definitely recommend reading that book because it really helps to provide a framework as far as raising white children are concerned. And then as far as interracial adoptions or fostering children that are different colors or races than you are, there's actually a wealth of children's books and books for adults that work with regard to transracial adoptions or parenting when one is a different race from your child. And then also there's very recently been a boom in the children's book industry with regards to books that are age appropriate, that discuss implicit bias, racism, structural oppression. And what I'll do is after this presentation wraps up, I will put a list of these books onto the CISL Facebook page. And so if you want more information about that, just like the CISL Facebook page, and I will update it before the end of the day with more resources that are for families who are wanting to engage in these conversations. We've got another question from an individual. They are struggling with addressing civil unrest as an entity. What are some ideas around how a company can be more involved with the current climate in a way that is not political? And then, what Iowa organizations are needing assistance around racial challenges while navigating COVID? Okay, two very good questions. Again, it really behooves corporations, organizations, initiatives to seek out subject matter experts with regards to implicit bias, racism, systemic oppression, and how it manifests in systems, workplace systems. And so certainly if you're the CEO of an organization and you've got a computer network issue that needs attending to, the first thing that you would probably do is reach out for professional technical support. We need to look at this issue as an issue that is in need of technical support, and professionals need to come in and provide that support. Because intending to do the right thing and navigate civil unrest or uncomfortable feelings in places of employment is great, but the impact of doing that without somebody that has training and a deep understanding of this work can be problematic for an organization and can sometimes backfire. So bringing in a professional, highly recommended. There are facilitators galore that are available to do this work. And again, I'm very available for complimentary initial consultations with folks that are, you might not necessarily be interested in working with CISL. We can certainly point you in the right direction after we have a conversation with you and get a clear understanding of what your needs are and what it is that you're looking for. Now, with regards to Iowa organizations in need of assistance with regards to racial challenges while navigating COVID, that's also a fantastic question. And I could answer in a few different ways. I want to put this statistic out to folks. 6 out of 10 direct care workers, caregivers, paraprofessionals, certified nursing assistants, these kinds of positions, real frontline positions at human service agencies or healthcare settings. 6 out of 10 of these individuals are Black, Indigenous, or other women of color. So these are essential workers, and I would invite everybody, as you're thinking of, as you've been thinking about essential workers throughout the pandemic, to think about these 6 out of 10 women who have been working in caregiving capacities with our loved ones in nursing home facilities and other institutional settings. Have been working directly with individuals with disabilities in group home settings or apartments, oftentimes without PPE, and definitely more often than not without hazard pay. These are folks that have been exposed throughout the pandemic to environments where COVID-19 statistics are showing us that COVID-19 is thriving. And so I'm kind of answering this question in a more meta way. What you hear me saying is, you know, any organization that supports people, human service agencies, is impacted by COVID-19 right now. And that certainly is not something I want to diminish. But the individuals that are doing the work, they need our support as well. And so I'm not saying write a check to an organization. What I am saying is get acquainted with your federal lawmakers. So if you're in Iowa, depending on the congressional district you're in, that's going to be either Abby Finkenauer, oh gosh, the guy that represent, Dave Loebsack, Cindy Axney if you're in Polk County, or Steve King if you're in Northwest Iowa. And then our U.S. Senators are Joni Ernst and Chuck Grassley. Get acquainted with them. Get comfortable with making phone calls to their offices or sending them emails, and ask them, you know, what are you doing with regards to ensuring that frontline healthcare human service workers are getting the support that they need right now. And right now that support is access to PPE, hazard pay, and ask them, you know, what are you doing with regards to these populations of people? What legislation that's in the works right now most closely correlates with individuals who are these direct support workers? And, you know, what are you doing to ensure that Iowans frontline workers have what they need in order to continue to serve Iowa's most vulnerable populations without putting themselves at risk as well? So that kind of a roundabout response, but it's something that we all need to be thinking about, because unfortunately COVID-19 is hitting communities of color in a disproportionate manner. And we've heard a lot of rhetoric about, well, healthcare disparities are a big reason why people of color are contracting COVID-19. 4 out of 5 Black Americans work jobs that do not allow us to work from home or work remotely. You can't collect recycling remotely. You have to actually go out into the community and do that. You can't be a CNA at a skilled nursing facility from home. You have to actually go to the skilled nursing facility to do that. So that is a big reason why a disproportionate number of people of color are being impacted by COVID-19. And so let's hold our federal lawmakers accountable to recognize that and to take steps to support our fellow Iowans who are on the front lines. So just want to put that out there. We've got time for maybe one other question if someone wants to add it to the chat box or speak it now. And if not, I would, yeah, Valerie?
Yeah. How do you apologize when you step in it? Because if you're saying that you understand that it's logical that, you know, that people have these blind spots.
Yes.
I am doing what I can as a person to amplify voices of people of color. But when I step in it, I've been the anxiety is killer. How do you fix that when you step in it with somebody?
That is a very good question. And my answer is, again, simple, but not necessarily easy. So typically with regard to opportunities to apologize that involve race, there's a lot of guilt and embarrassment that just bubbles to the surface. And it can sometimes overshadow our apology. I'm so sorry. I'm a horrible person. I can't believe I did this. I'm a piece of garbage. And it's just no hope for me. Okay, well, there was kind of an apology there, but there was also a lot of other stuff there that wasn't necessarily apology. So apologizing, I am sorry. I acknowledge that I hurt you. I acknowledge that I harmed you. Period. No sundry flowery language, no, revelations about low self-esteem, none of that stuff. I am sorry. I hurt you. I acknowledge that. What can I do to make this right? So that's step 2. What can I do to make this right? Don't try to figure that out for the person. The onus of answering that question is not on you. Let the other person contribute to the dynamic by indicating what it would take. More than likely, if it's an issue pertaining to race, they're so used to not getting an apology, or getting that apology that's just bombarded with, oh, I'm this horrible person, white people are just the worst. That's what we're so used to. We're not used to just the unbridled, I am sorry, I have harmed you. And that more often than not is enough. But if you ask them, what can I do to make this right? Then that allows them to tell you. And then if it's reasonable on your end, follow through with that. And then move forward. You don't have to keep going back and say, you know what, I just wanted to tell you, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning yesterday, and I know that what I did to you was 6 months ago, but I feel like really guilty about it all over again. And I just want to apologize all over again. No need to do that. After that initial apology, move forward. But also keep in mind that depending on the context of what occurred, you might not receive a response. You might not receive what you perceive to be forgiveness, and that has to be okay as well.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, my friends, it is 12:45, and I just want to thank everybody for joining Fuse DSM and Central Iowa Center for Independent Living this afternoon for this very important conversation. I really, really appreciate everybody's time. Again, I know that this is not easy stuff to navigate. Please feel free to follow up with me. I'm very easy to get a hold of, rema@sisl.org. Again, just move forward together. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.